Mr. Dustin Garrett, it's been far too long. How are you, sir?
Good, Matt. How are you doing? We just survived a massive snowstorm here in Colorado, so the sun's out and everything is looking good. So
It's tickety boo, except uranium equities, and we'll get on to that.
we'll get on to
We'll
that.
get on to
Yes.
that. So, I guess the big events. I haven't seen you since actually you were in London with the WNA. You've obviously just come back from another industry conference,
Yes.
but I got to start with I can't ignore Mr. Trump. Oh, I won't ask you your political leanings, but what is the impact of that for the nuclear space?
Well, obviously, because of the events last week, it's now become a significant issue in the industry or topic. And if you go back to Trump, let's call it 1.0, the word I think used was he was kind of tepid on nuclear. In other words, a whole different context. Natural gas prices were down, so there were reactors competing against that. There were, early premature shutdowns being scheduled. Then we had the 232 national security investigation into uranium from January of 18 to the middle of 19, where it was recognized that, imports into the U.S. Presented a threat to national security. And, President Trump at that time declined to do anything that would interrupt those shipments. You may remember they were going to put in place a criterion that the utilities buy 25% of their uranium from U.S. production. So anyway, it was again kind of not necessarily overly positive, not negative, but kind of middle of the road. I think the context now has changed so radically. The old days of 1% growth, maybe, which is now, out the window with more and more forecasts being that, two and a half to three times expansion of nuclear from IEA, IAEA, you name it, the WNA, the London conference. That's the tripling is now kind of the scenario that everyone is talking about. And then you layer on top of it, and I'm sure we'll get to it, is the emergence of the data centers. I mean, it's been it's overwhelming, I think, for the industry to some degree. But I think, Mr. Trump's a realist. I think he'll look around. He's said green energy is a scam, but the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Johnson, has said his preference is to go into the, Inflation Reduction Act, which Biden used to do a number of positive things for nuclear, loan guarantees and, production credits, things like that. But rather than use a sledgehammer on it, maybe a scalpel to carve out some of the programs that, can be supported by the new government. So again, it's a whole different, let's say, context. And again, with the demand coming, particularly from the data centers, that's, as you know, hyper competitive. And you can't, I think, turn your back on these guys that want to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in that phase of the technology. So I think, as a general statement, it's still early, but I think Trump will continue to be supportive of nuclear more so than he was in his first administration. So we'll see, what that means. There'll be a focus on the U.S. fuel cycle, no question of that, for independence, America first. And I think it'll go all through uranium conversion and enrichment. And so the positive message still is not only there, it's getting better as we move forward. And again, just to touch on London, the WNA, the theme of the conference was, quote, turning momentum into energy, something we've talked about for literally years, where now is the time. Now the nuclear power industry, including fuel cycle, you name it, it's time to step up. what can you do to meet these objectives? And, part of it, as you know, was the financial community. I mean, the big investors have come out in support of nuclear. We had a number of meetings in London with very large funds, and they're like, now nuclear, we got to get involved. How can we get involved? Where, when, you name it. So again, I think the availability of capital, which has always been an issue, if you have a good story, I think the capital's there. So, it's moving down. There were the tier ones, and now it's starting to, I think, get lower down, like in the uranium side.
Right.
Now, again, we'll talk the equities, but that's at this point a little bit different story. So, but the overall was super positive, for nuclear.
Right. So we've got super positive Trump government since they get installed. If anything, I think what it's saying is not much has changed. That people are concerned as to how his views changed and evolved. They seem to be from cautious to positive. I think it was mentioned in his acceptance speech as well. So that's kind of good news, but it's in a way not new news in terms of that momentum. I guess the thing I'm trying to understand, and I'm always going to bring it back to content, which is going to help me with my equities investing.
Of course,
is was understanding the macro to the extent as to how it influences the equities markets, because we are sitting in this pregnant pause for a sort of uncomfortably long period now, and we've talked about tightly coiled springs. We've talked about, the positivity from these conferences and industry and so forth, but I don't know. Nothing's making a difference yet. So I'll ask it. What is the catalyst which is actually gonna do something? Not the theory of it. What's going to do it?
Yeah, I think, as you say, the positive side, that didn't change. I think it is getting increasingly positive, if that's a good concept. Again, going into Kansas City, there were all the U.S. nuclear fuel managers there, virtually all the suppliers globally. And, some of the observations that we're now hearing, for example, UX, they did a deep dive on the Russian nuclear situation. They literally went from the reactors to the fuel cycle, and not to misquote, but their view on uranium in Russia concluded with Russia urgently needs to secure uranium going forward. In other words, we talked about this, and I'd been picking up that the Russian program was actually short uranium, as strange as that. So now this is a kind of an independent deep dive by a well-known industry consulting firm, and that was the final conclusion on uranium. They don't have enough, be it from uranium one, be it domestic, whatever. And so that was one thing. The other is the Kazakhs. They gave a presentation and did a macro supply demand. Their conclusion was new potential production is not sufficient to cover demand post-2030. They'd not said that before. Some of these, it was, well, we're working on it, we can do this, and, and now the Kazakhs are saying, well, we don't even have enough identified potential production to start meeting demand, quote, post-2030. And to finish off the Cameco third quarter call, they effectively said, I'm paraphrasing, that, there's insufficient primary and secondary uranium to meet demand. There's a structural supply shortfall, production cost inflation, and there's a need for a higher uranium price to incentivize needed new production to fill the supply gap. They really hadn't said that much in the past. It was, we've got brownfields, we've got this and that, and, this is a brownfields renaissance and all that, and they said they're backing out of the market because they see much better terms coming. The other thing coming out of Kansas City, and I was told I had a lot of utility meetings, was the utilities were using this as market research. They were meeting with virtually all the suppliers, getting ready to come into the term market. Okay, because a number of them are now needs in 27, 28 start, and they've said they plan to come out next year. So do they come out January 2nd? Do they wait? So that's what they were. So when you say, well, it didn't appear as though there's a lot of change. Oh, I think there's a lot of increased traction now, because what we've been missing, as you know, is new term contracts. They've really minimized that. Although, UX came out with several tens of millions they added recently. I think that's a Kazakh-Chinese agreements, and it tells you something about the situation with the Kazakhs. But, the new term contracting in the U.S., I saw a number of below 15 million pounds so far this year for future delivery for a market that consumes 45. So it's like a third of, the quote replacement rate. So maybe on the outside, and the term price, it started the year at 68. We're now published at 82. I was told there are deals at 84, 85. So, that continues to strengthen, continues to hold up, even in the face of some weakening on the spot side, which again, the spot volume is, I think UX had 36 million pounds for the year so far. So we could probably finish off not much above 40. So that's a pretty minimal spot market transaction volume. Somebody said, oh, well, Sprott bought 50 million or 50,000 pounds last week. Well, that's not really going to move the needle a whole lot. So, the demand is backed off. So we're seeing tranches of material being offered at lower prices. We're not talking tens of millions of pounds. It's very small volumes. But unfortunately, everybody continues to look at the spot price. Well, it's really that term market that's going to be driving where we're going. And the other thing, and we'll get back to the data centers, Matt, one more quote. Jack Edlow, who's been in the business since the late 60s, major player in the transportation side, got up at a panel and started off by saying, the future nuclear fuel cycle industry will not be utility driven. Silence in the conference room. And what he was getting at were the hyperscale data centers. If they continue on the path they're on, they will be setting what goes on in the fuel cycle. As the utilities are kind of more conservative, they don't want to go out very far with coverage. If you do a 20-year offtake for electricity, aren't you going to ask the question of, do you have fuel for 20 years? I would. So I think the utilities are going to have to start answering those kinds of questions. And it's not what they've been doing in the market. So
I think the data center thing is really interesting because of the people behind it. The technology companies have billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars behind them. But I think also by definition, they're technology companies. So they will be looking to, secure get their energy security from a multitude of different sources. I am intrigued to sort of see how many commit for how long to the nuclear energy provision, and how many are looking to future energy sources as well. And for them to pick it up and then and drop it as quickly if something better comes along is easier because they got the money to do that. So I want to see that data come through, and that's a really exciting quote there. But having come from the technology side myself, I'm sort of conscious of the decision-making process. So for now, I'm excited, but with some caution, I have to say. And this is I'm an uranium equities guy through and through. I want it all to work, but I also want to base it on fact and with some critical thinking thrown in there. Can I go back to the kind of the Trump thing? Do
Okay.
you mind?
No.
Because I think Trump has this. He's a businessman, and I like that. He's not looking to start a new war. He's looking to, you know, create business for America and get America doing what it does best, and which is like, making things, being thought leaders and technology leaders, and all those wonderful things. But he also is quite good at making friends, it seems, with some of the people we are not friends with at the moment. Do you think Trump will open the door for conversations with Russia? Because right now, all we've heard for the last sort of 2 years is Kazatomprom, Russian influence, Russia product. There are sanctions on them. All this is now heading east off to China, and we're talking about new currency. So the BRICS countries talking about a new currency to kind of compete with, if not kill the dollar. It's all very antagonistic type stuff. Could America actually take a different tack now? Could that open the door to because we in the West talk about this bifurcation of the market, but the reality is we're not there on conversion to UF6 or enrichment or fuel fabrication, etc. We don't have that. We don't have enough time to actually build up our own capabilities yet. So, would a policy of open door policy, or is an open door policy likely under the Trump administration? And what would that do? What's the knock-on effect?
Well, there's talk about, he and Putin will get together and the war will stop in Ukraine, and therefore Russian material will then become acceptable back into the U.S. I think that you're getting at that a little bit. The Russian ban, keep in mind, was legislated. It wasn't an executive order, and the bipartisan support was significant. Now, again, the Democrats and Republicans can't agree the sun came up, let alone. So that was put in place, and to get away from that, you'd have to have that legislation effectively removed. That's not going to happen. So the Russian ban will stay in place. Now, so the Russians, they're selling elsewhere. And so now the thing is you've seen is the Chinese. Okay, there's been a lot of talk about, look, Chinese EUP deliveries went up significantly into the U.S. Could be, as I've referred to, the Chinese laundry, where they take in Russian and then send, their own material. Well, this came up in Kansas City. And there was a comment that, look at the Chinese are like, filling the gap. Okay, well, the director of nuclear fuel for Constellation stood up and said, hey, we're the ones that have been buying Chinese enrichment. There's apparently not been 1 pound of uranium sold through that mechanism. And so, the idea of more tariffs, they're 7.5% right now. The UPA is demanding 50 or 60%. But the point is, the uranium is not flowing. In other words, the utilities are sending back what's called carrier feed, because you can't send a SWU on its own. And so she said, I've got 21 reactors, and I have to keep them operating. Well, and that obviously is her mandate. But I think there is a growing discussion about, hey, let's shut off the Chinese too. They're helping, circumvent the Russian ban. And as we know, Mr. Trump has talked about a lot of more tariffs on the Chinese. So again, is this an area that'll be off, not to be touched? Maybe. It remains, it's still speculation. I don't think that Trump will reopen the U.S. market to a flood, because that runs against the, energy independence move. And I think he will encourage more production. How do we get more pounds out of the ground, like he did with gas? So that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it just kind of feels like as a business move, it kind of feels, and it always has done since sanctions came in, slightly foolish in the sense like if you've got a backup plan and everything ready to go, no problemo. If I look into the oil and gas business, which I used to work in, when sanctions were put on Iran, the oil didn't stop flowing. It just flowed a different direction. You had their mortal enemy, Israel, buying oil from Iran because they suited their needs. Likewise here, if there's a kind of whole infrastructure and industry around the conversion, enrichment, fabrication, etc., then you say, okay, we're ready to go. There's no impact on us, but there is an impact now on the West with these sanctions in place. And I just wondered if that was something to just buy us more time to kind of get our ducks in a row, to get the industry up, running, and built. Is that something that we could foresee? I guess the answer is we don't know, but it would seem eminently sensible in a business context.
It could, but again, he's going to have major political issues to handle because now it's like in the political domain. The ban Russian, look at China. China's now persona non grata in the nuclear industry. Nobody wants to deal with them. So, and I was told again that some of the U.S. utilities are beginning to raise that question with suppliers. If you have Chinese involvement, we won't sign a contract with you. So
we've seen that across all metals. It's very complicated.
It's very complicated. Let me go back to your comment though about the data center guys. It is interesting to watch the progression. Right before London, I was involved in a call with a big U.S. bank that had talked to utilities, hyperscalers, reactor vendors, and the conclusion was the hyperscalers would sign long-term offtake contracts above market, which they're doing, but they really didn't want to invest in the energy infrastructure because it's an input to their process, but it wasn't their business. And the Microsoft guy in London reconfirmed that from a panel at the WNA. The next week or two, here comes Ellison going, well, we've got a site now with 3 SMRs permitted on it. Oh, so then we all of a sudden have them investing in SMR companies. Well, so they've moved in like a month or two from we don't want to touch that to now, oh, well, we're going to invest in these various SMR. And I think that will move the SMRs forward more quickly than if the utilities were relied upon to support the technology. The head of Southern Nuclear, Alabama and Georgia, now they just had a very poor experience with Vogtle 3 and 4. He came out and said, oh, SMRs, unproven, too costly, post-2030. Hey, the hyperscale guys will go, hey, how do we get this moving? You don't have to be a utility to build a reactor. Look at what Gates is doing right up here in Wyoming. He's building an SMR site. So I think they're realists. They need the power. Yeah, they'll do geothermal and all, but there's not much of that. So where do they go? More coal plants? That's now talked about. Well, there'll be more coal plants in operation. We'll see about that. I think the hyperscalers will look towards nuclear till nuclear can't do it. So they're going to push as hard as they can, and it goes into the fuel cycle. I think they'll start to look at the fuel cycle and say, where are the bottlenecks? I think they'll build a conversion plant. If I were them, I'd sit around a table and go, conversion's a bottleneck, we'll build our own. What does it cost?
Exactly.
Where do we put it? And away we go. And leave. This gets back to Ed Lowe's comment about the utilities are probably not, they're a major factor, but there's a good chance they won't be leading the fuel cycle in the future. It'll be these guys going, I'll build a conversion plant. I'll buy a uranium mine. Big deal. So it costs me a couple $2 billion. So what? If it gets me to where I need to go on my AI data center, then we're going to do it. So
Exactly.
that's the
I
change.
agree with you. It could well be the change, but sure. Well, from what I know from my time in the tech space, is that they will, as you say, go and look at what the bottlenecks are. And I think bottlenecks, not just in terms of the kind of processing side of things, but it's also going to be the supply side of things. Where maybe they can throw money at the problem in a way that the government has not up until maybe the last year or so, because they're going to need to. Because we'll go back to, so we're bouncing around here a bit, but it's really about the thesis around nuclear's growth profile. Not do we need nuclear? We need nuclear. Not will Equities recover? They will recover. It's really the kind of growth profile and who's going to drive that. And it seems like government will help in terms of its regulatory controls in terms of safety around licensing and policy support and all of those wonderful things. I'm not so sure how I feel about the carbon element anymore. But if government can't move it forward at the pace that nuclear needs, then maybe the technology companies will. And even so, do you think the kind of processing side is going to be kind of a quick fix solution thing for them? Because they're going to be held back by the same problems. It's not just money they're going to need to do. They are going to need the kind of policy licensing and permissions from government to deliver these things, surely.
Yeah, and they can throw a lot of money and lawyers and lobbyists into the discussion, unlike the utilities that can't do that. And the other thing, Matt, is what if they look around and they go, okay, where's the inventory? This has come up. It's not just me. And they look around and they say, well, there's some sequesterers holding almost 90 million pounds. What if we decide we'll just buy that? We'll buy the companies. We'll buy the inventory. Why not? I mean, why would you not do that? It's sitting at converters. So you've already moved up a step. Then you say, okay, conversion, it's a chemical plant. So, there's a site at Gore, Oklahoma. Well, so do they go, well, let's do that. They wouldn't touch enrichment, but what if they go to Urenco and say, well, you have a site in Idaho that you put a lot of work into and the utilities didn't support it. How about we come in and we will buy that enrichment? We will fund you building that facility. Oh, well, maybe that's I think that's a point Edlow was trying to make, is that these guys will look around and they'll go, what are the impediments? And we will find a solution and not study it for years and go, well, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I think they're going to do an end run around the utilities if they decide to move in that direction.
And was this statement from a position of knowledge or a position of
high degree of knowledge?
High degree of knowledge. These all conversations already happening as to that. This is what the technology companies are doing today.
I would have to think these guys are not stupid, and they go, okay, what is going to hold up my access to low cost, nuclear power? And they'll go, I can fix that. What else? What else is there?
Okay.
They're not, again, they have a different business model than the utilities. Well, we have to go to the regulators. We have to go to the board. We can't put money in advance. We can't invest. We can't. These guys are going, I don't want to hear we can't, because they need to do these things.
They need to do these things, but they also need to kind of go by the letter of the law. There's regulatory risks. I don't think there's going to be policy changes, but there could be licensing delays on the mining. I'm talking about if you're going to invest into mines, they're going to come with the same problems that a lot of miners do at the moment. Clearly not cash constrained in any way, shape, or form, but licensing, objections, safety requirements, public acceptance, all that kind of good stuff. Is important. Then they kind of hit technical, construction delays, and they could care less about cost overruns or operational incidents. All those sort of risk management issues. They're going to come across these things. So, and that is time. And for them, again, money will solve a lot of those problems, and they could probably care less about price volatility in the market, like we would as in mining investors, etc., or capital costs and political opposition. To your point, I accept that they're going to just lobby the heck out of this thing, no problemo. But it's not an overnight thing, and therefore, do you rush headlong into something where you just don't know all the moving parts yet, and there's a time frame required to kind of build these solutions out? Do you know what I mean? I'm just trying to be more realistic
Absolutely.
about the time frame and realities of this and what happens in those intervening times with new technologies coming through, which may sate their some of their energy requirements. So I'm trying to be yin to your yang.
Not all mining projects are in the same situation. There are those that already have permits, engineering done, and they're waiting on the utilities to come in and commit. And you know the list. So you go, well, again, they're not stupid. They'll go, okay, who can do this sooner? And that's who we're going to talk to. Maybe it's a multi-leg stool. We'll buy some of that sequestered inventory. We'll come and talk to the guys that can move forward more quickly. I don't know. I mean, that's for them to decide. They're a bunch of smart guys with a lot of money, and they can do all kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, some project that's 2035 probably is not going to be of interest. The Moroccan phosphates, they're supposed to start up next year. Well, why don't they go to them and say, hey, what does it take? We'll fund your uranium plant, because they claim they can do 5 million pounds by 2030. Now, it's not huge, but you cobble 2 or 3 of those guys together and you move on to the next challenge. So,
okay. The other side of the argument is, let's say these technology companies do come in with their hundreds of billions of bucks, and they kind of say, right, we're going to secure all of this energy for us. What's that do for utilities? What's the knock on as a uranium investor?
Then the utilities have a new challenge they face, because their business model is different than the high tech guys. And then you can say, oh, the government will come in, and I've heard all kinds of arguments. It's like when there's a crunch, the U.S. government will seize all of the inventory sitting at Converdyn. Maybe. I don't know. They could. But how long does that take? And it goes to the Supreme Court eventually. But here's
the thing, right? If the government do that, that's my money as a taxpayer, right?
Yes.
If the government don't do that, the utilities got to respond, and they charge me for that increased price. There's a kind of this kind of sort of erratic price change in the nuclear space, nuclear energy space, it impacts me. But I'm sitting at home, my heating bill's gone up again, which we saw that a couple of years. I didn't like it then. I probably won't like it in the future. So I'm trying to say, is there we don't need someone to kind of come in and seal up all the uranium, because as equity investors we'll make a ton of money. It's light in the short term, right? But for everyone else, that's kind of painful, and not kind of equitable division of energy for all of the people who need it. Potentially, again, this is kind of
but I guess, Matt, the point is,
arguments up.
Whoever does it, I'm getting back to uranium where we spend time. The price of uranium is not likely to drop. The question is, how high does it go? So, is it available at some point? Yeah, it will be, but not at $77 or $82. So
okay, well let's step away from the hypotheticals and the world of what if, okay? Because the reality is there's a pregnant pause with price of uranium at the moment. With spot, that's the thing that people look at. You and I know that term is where the deals actually happen, right? So and this kind of, we're now moving into the supply side of the conversation. Demand, we're great. Violent agreement, it's going up, right? To the supply side, there's a few people who are near term suppliers into the market, new suppliers. Okay, there's some existing suppliers who are on care maintenance, and let's say incentive, give me that price incentive and I will start producing again. Fine. Then there's a kind of raft of people behind them who have not produced before, who say, I think I can be in production by 2026, 7, 8, 9, 10, 30, whatever they're promising, right? I don't believe all of them. For some of the reasons I've stated in this conversation around the risk. How do you view the supply side of the equation fitting into the numbers that maybe you heard UEX talk about, or unless they were just talking specifically only about Russia? Do you think that are you seeing supply stories out there that you sort of question or doubt?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their opinion. Those that have spent time in the supply sector of restarts, will they all meet their proposed capacity? I've heard, stories on several of them. The new greenfields projects, will they come on according to proposed schedules? Some could, others will probably be delayed. That's a point. And as you build in delays, the situation gets worse. That's why Cameco said they're backing out of the market. They said the future market, much like NextGen has said for years, that when we come out to do contracts, the market will be significantly different. We're not going to come out now and start committing our production. We got into this discussion more than a year ago. And I think those that have come out and done a lot of contracts may find out that those are not the best that they could do, but they've got their own logic, covers our costs, make a little margin, we're all good, we're moving forward. But again, when you get Cameco going, hey, we're not going to go out and run around and get contracts, why would we? When we believe the market is going to change dramatically, and we want to capture that for our investors. It's not just the customers. It's, they've got various stakeholders, and the investors, as you know, have not really been part of the equation much. It's, whatever's left over, I guess they can participate in. The point is, Matt, it's the fundamentals across the board are changing. And so to say, okay, I'm going to now figure out exactly. I'd say, I've talked to the long-term and, industry consultants. I said, I don't know how you forecast the price. We're beyond the marginal mine. Let's put that. Yeah, that's fine. But when the demand hits the market, and there are those like the high-tech guys, they'll go, I'll pay what it takes. I mean, so what? Then the utilities are going to have to, I guess, step up their game in some cases. Some of them are on board. They've been out doing contracts and all this. Others have been, no, I don't want to do an $80 contract that'll embarrass me in the future. Okay, that's their decision. So we'll see. Now, there are discussions that some reactors could be at operational risk. In other words, they may have to extend fuel cycles. They may have to do a bunch of things because they don't have the fuel in the right form, at the right place, at the right time. They've waited too long. And some people have said that Titanic's going over Niagara Falls already. You can't do what you need to do, even for the existing fleet. It's not these guys, oh yeah, down the road, maybe. It's the guys that are out there now. So, I mean, there's a huge issue on the supply side, and it's getting worse.
I 100% hear you. And if we take a positive view on the AI data centers, absolutely going to get worse. It's going to get worse in lots of different ways. I guess utilities do have the option of looking at hydro, solar, wind, oil.
Try to permit a hydro plant. I worked for a utility that had one. You want 20 years of permitting? They're tearing dams down now in the Northwest so the salmon can swim up the river. So, that's out. Geothermal. I was involved in California. Spain, there's not enough geothermal resources. So you can look at bring it all. And it's got permitting problems and,
Nevertheless, it's a process which some people are going to have to start because they're going to run out of options, right?
At some point, and they're not doing
is
it.
my point. We need all of the above, and I think that to the dam thing, I think the Spanish government, the Valencia government specifically, have found what removing dams will actually do to you. The knock-on effects of these things are huge. Look, I think it's a very interesting dynamic out there with energy. Energy demands per head is going up. There's more people being born every day. Populations are rising around the world. Energy has always been and will continue to be a big topic of debates, and I think the anti-fossil fuel people might going to have to think about long and hard about do they genuinely want to pay 2, 3, 4 times more for their energy, or is there room for all of the above? But nuclear is definitely feels like here to stay. Trump seems pro-positive. Been lots of really good conversations around the past week or so on that. In terms of our friends abroad, just finish off on the kind of the pan global thing. Africa, it's getting spicy out there, right? We've got I point to Global Atomic right now. I think they've put an announcement out recently about DFC will make a decision in Q1 next year about the funding there. It also gives Global a bit more time to look at alternative financing. But they seem to be moving the project along on the ground. When you look to Niger now, are you as concerned as you may have been when the coup happened?
Yes, Global Atomic, got to hand it to them. They're trying to move the project forward. Orano clearly is backing down their involvement in Niger, and they've made it that they've had meetings and discussions that they're now looking elsewhere. And it's Mongolia, it's Uzbekistan. Let's say tier 2 areas. But yeah, the situation in Niger, I don't think is going to go positive for Western utilities in the future. What can you say? So yeah, we didn't really dive into some of the supply issues. Parts of Africa are difficult, I think. I don't want to name countries because I don't, but Namibia seems to be holding up okay. There's no geopolitical issues there that I've seen, but you get moving up toward, Central Africa, and you've got issues. So again, the supply story is getting much more difficult on top of what we just talked about on the demand side. So, it just, to me, it's we've never been here before. And the other thing we didn't touch on, and it came up at the WNA working groups, is grassroots exploration. In other words, if you start to look out 2050 and you're going to double, triple nuclear, you don't have enough projects. And you've got to now, to some degree, start layering in grassroots exploration. You've got to be at northern territory of Australia, parts of Canada, South America. You've got to fund those exploration geologists to go out and find more material. The identified projects haven't disappeared, but the cupboard is getting more bare. Let's put it that way. And the point is, who's going to fund that? If it's going to be the production companies, they have to have higher prices. I mean, it's everything says the utilities aren't going to do it. They go, no, we're not our job. We're not going to fund that. So you go, well, then, it's happening in Saudi Arabia. The prince is funding it. So, I mean, as you get further out, the issues even get more complex. Where are the exploration geologists? That's what they do. They're different than a production geologist. So
yeah, okay. I hear you around Africa. I'm not trying to avoid talking about that. I think Africa has got its own challenges. I think there's some companies which have been able to kind of move things forward, and others which haven't. We're seeing in Australia too. We've got this Australian chap called Jonathan Fisher, Jono, John O'May. He said, we're talking us through the political changes there and the impact of the US elections on, Australian politics as well. So, the Labor government getting a particularly hard time on the East Coast, and I think still just holding in there on the West Coast, but changing attitudes towards uranium on the supply side, which is good news. I think that I agree with you. I think if you're some of these technology companies, you're going to want to maybe go a little bit upstream and say, put a bit of money into groups who are perhaps sitting on a discovery or a lot of drilling, and maybe help out there. I think that'd be great news. Big fan of Wyoming, big fan of Utah.
Sure.
As jurisdictions, some nice little companies in there, like Myriad and small Aussie company GTI. And in fact, lots of people there. We could name check a lot of people, but yeah, it seems to be happening in the US. What they need to do is some consolidation, I think.
Probably.
ISO energy style. Get some consolidation going.
Yep. No question. But again, the supply story hasn't gotten better over the last year or two. So.
Yep. Here we are. Well, here we go. Once again, we're saying, come on, where's this thing going to get moving again? Hopefully soon. Hopefully in the new year.
As they say, Matt, I see green shoots out there.
Oh,
so
we've
anyway.
said that every year. We've said that every year since 2019.
That's true.
It's tauntingness, like a mischievous mistress.
Yes.
Too much. It's too much. Onwards, upwards. Doesn't good to see you again.
Yeah.
Really good to see you again. So hope runs eternal, I think, and we shall speak to you soon. Hopefully,
we should reconvene in the first quarter, because I think we'll see much more activity coming in the term market. So that'll be a new factor. Who can respond and when? So
I look forward to it. As always, lovely to see you, sir. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, see you later. Bye.